This week in Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is brought to you by Adept Roll. More about them later in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated armies from the past week of competitive play and talk about what's doing well. And this is a pretty interesting week, given that we're seeing a little bit of a consolidation of the metagame. New Death Guard have been released and are making their impact felt on the game as a whole. So let's get into it with a metagame breakdown. First up, as I mentioned before, Death Guard, using their brand new codex, are absolutely dominating with no less than 6 undefeated results this week at the Maryland Open, destroying the Storm of Silence GT with 2 undefeated results, top 1 and 2 in that event. War on the Worlds also being taken down by Death Guard, Gigabyte's May event, and the RB Cup finale. Now, hot on their heels is actually a faction that I might not have expected that did extremely well this week, that being Imperial Knights. We saw them take down the Mayhem 4 event, where they had both number 1 and number 2 spot, 2 undefeated results at that event. They also took down the San Diego Classic, as well as the South Yorkshire GT. Aeldari also doing fairly well, mostly with Ynnari builds using Devoted of Yniad, that being at the Alberta Classic, GT, and Adversario Wargaming. However, at the San Diego Classic, they were able to go undefeated with a little bit of a different list in a Spirit Conclave, which I am so excited to talk about. So we're going to discuss how that went down. Now, not to be outdone, Space Marines also doing fairly well this week. Ultramarines at the Minsk Eternal GT, as well as Dark Angels at the Winchester 40k GT, although I will caveat that one. Player didn't actually put their detachment in their list, so I don't know what detachment they're playing with, but we will still talk about that list because it features Lionel Johnson, the great man himself, the Primarch of the Dark Angels, seeing some play, which is pretty cool. Chaos Demons took down the Alamo GT, one of the larger events of the weekend. Chaos Space Marines going undefeated at the Game Grid Open. Chaos Knights at OWN's Breaking Point. Emperor's Children at the Brighton GT11. And last and maybe least, in this case, Thousand Suns taking down the Storm of Silence. Now, normally we don't talk about factions who have new content previewed, but this Thousand Suns list is actually quite a bit of a mold break, so I may get into it if I have time this episode. Now, before we move on, let's talk about where to watch some of this coverage if you want to see games this week. The South Yorkshire GT was streamed at the Top of the Table Minis YouTube channel, and the Mayhem GT was streamed by our friends over at War Games Live. If you know of any other event coverage this week that I did not catch, let me know down in the comment section so we can take a peek at their coverage. Now, speaking of coverage, there's some exciting stuff going on this coming weekend, that being next week, I guess. There may not be a show that next week because I will be traveling. I'm going to try to get one out in between my travel stints, but it'll be up to whether I can finagle it logistically. But that's because I will be traveling all the way over to Dallas, Texas for the DreamHack National Tabletop League 40k Final. That is an 8-player team event, and this will be the finals, showcasing some of the most competitive team format 40k in North America. Now, I've been posting about it in my Discord and on my community page, but I put a ton into revamping my stream coverage setup for this event, so please come check me out May 23rd, 24th, and 25th on this channel. We're going to have multiple tables of coverage available. We're going to have new cameras, new microphones, a huge upgrade to my stream, so I hope that you guys enjoy. As a little bit of an aside, the following Monday, that being the 26th, I'll also be on Twitch on the Angry Joe Show. We might talk some 40k. I don't know if I'm going to be playing 40k, but we are certainly going to be playing miniature games, and I'm excited to go hang out with those guys over there. You can join them at twitch.tv/AngryJoeShow, and I'll be posting more information about when that goes live on my community page as I have all the information. Now, with that, all that housekeeping out of the way, let's move on to talk about some actual lists, just following a word from our sponsors.
This video is sponsored by Adept Roll. Are you tired of guessing whether or not your 40k game plan will pay off? I'm happy to introduce Adept Roll, a dice probability calculator usable on basically any mobile device. For those who haven't used these tools before, they offer a very simple plug-in system where you can input your weapon stats versus defending stats and calculate the probabilities of certain dice results or the average amount of damage that you should expect from a particular attack sequence. Adept Roll is a mobile app designed to give you precise calculations on probabilities for these attacks. It saves you the time and effort of doing the complex math and allows you to focus more heavily on actually outplaying your opponent on the battlefield. I myself use these tools quite often in my games of 40k, especially if I'm identifying 2 lines of play.
Curious what the math hammer is. According to this, the average damage is 3.
Adept Roll also features profile imports from both Rosterizer and New Recruit, allowing you to import your unit and attack profiles quicker and easier for faster calculations on the fly. So take control of your 40k battles with more powerful dice insight and download Adept Roll for free on iOS or Android by following the links down in the video description.
Now, we're going to start our discussion by talking about Death Guard, and for that, we're going to go to a Death Guard-dominated event, the Storm of Silence Grand Tournament. This was a major-level event, 106 players, held over in Spokane, Washington. This event was topped by both Timothy Grant and Donald Plummer, both of them running the new faction with the new codex to 5-0 results. And let's go ahead and talk about Timothy Grant and his Death Guard build. This build was using Champions of Contagion. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of this detachment moving on into the future. It's certainly the most straightforward detachment, although I will say that Virulent Vectorium, the objective secure kind of index style detachment, has also seen a lot of play this week as well. The one thing I haven't seen quite as much is use of Mortarian's Anvil, but I think the more infantry-focused detachments are also extremely strong. This list in particular was running Biologus Putrefier with Final Ingredient, so he's able to turn on a second Affliction on his Contagions of Nurgle as soon as he kills a character unit with his unit. We then have a second Foul Blightspawn, 1 Lord of Contagion, 1 Lord of Virulence, 2 Malignant Plaguecasters, a Tallyman, and Typhus. So we have 1 unit that's fully wombo comboed out with the Plague Marines, a Biologus Putrefier, and the Malignant Plaguecaster to give 5+ critical hits, lethal hits, and sustained hits to that whole unit. We then have a second unit potentially with Fights First from that Foul Blightspawn so that they can act as a little bit more defensive of a melee unit. The Tallyman can sit in the back and generate CP to fuel all of the incredible both offensive and defensive buffs that the Champions of Contagion grants the army access to. And then as we see, we do have 2 units of 10 Plague Marines to combo those fetid Virian characters into, 2 Chaos Rhinos to carry them around and give them fire support, so some wound rerolls for those sustained hits as well. A Chaos Spawn unit for utility, 2 units of Tesseract Terminators, likely for the Lord of Virulence as well as Typhus to join into, since they do have some good, respectively, offensive and defensive buffs for those Death Shroud Terminators, and being able to deliver those powerful characters with the 6-inch Deep Strike that Death Shrouds can get access to is a huge bonus as well. Then we have the Lord of Virulence, who can Deep Strike in independently and then buff a trio of heavy Blight Launcher fetid bloat drones for 100 points. You get a hugely powerful Strength 10 AP2 3 damage gun that then gets hit rerolls and lethal hits thanks to the Lord of Virulence. I guess it already has lethal hits, but it combos the lethal hits with rerolls from the Lord of Virulence, so that's a huge benefit as well. A little bit of anti-tank from a Mephitic Blight Hauler and some utility from 2 units of 10 Poxwalkers. Now, I don't think that there's anything particularly groundbreaking about this list, having looked at the new codex. We have these 2 big Plague Marine bricks that can fight over the center of the table. Those guys can go in and clear out even heavy targets that move into their threat range in the middle, stuff that moves in to potentially try to knock the Poxwalkers off of any objectives that they might have deployed on or moved into. Then, as the game goes on and the battle lines start to get joined, you are able to fight at range with the heavy Blight Launcher bloat drones. You're able to fight at close range with those Plague Marines, and then once people get up and close and personal into your Contagion auras, you can 6-inch Deep Strike Death Shroud Terminators next to them, and either Rapid Ingress or make an easy charge with these guys, and absolutely counterpunch to do devastating damage to your opponent. So this list, especially attritionally, which I guess does make sense for Death Guard, it's got everything going for it. It is absolutely incredible, and also has some great character support from things like the Tallyman to support the army as it's doing all that stuff as well. So I would expect to see armies look a lot like this as you move on into the future of the Death Guard Codex. This is probably going to be very quintessential of a build for them. Now, speaking of major level events, let's move over to Mayhem 4 Live Free or Dice Hard. This was another huge event, over 100 players, 155 at this one in particular. And as I mentioned before, this one was live streamed by War Games Live. Now, just like the Storm of Silence was dominated by Death Guard, Mayhem 4 was dominated by Imperial Knights, which is wild. Both Dustin Hammond and Andrew Votter went 6-0, 6 wins and 0 losses with Imperial Knights. Let's go ahead and talk about the first place placement here. Dustin Hammond. Now I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, so hopefully it doesn't get too hard to read as we talk about Dustin Hammond's first place placer list, because he did import it as of an image, which is something you can do on Best Coast Bearings. That doesn't typically get used outside of its meme potential, which is essentially what we've done here. So we've got a nice little ode to Canis Rex. So Dustin is playing essentially one big knight plus a bunch of little ones. And this is actually both Dustin Hammond and Andrew Votter played very similar builds. There were a couple very minor differences in the exact composition of their armature wings as well as their allied units. But for the most part, they both followed along this trend of the single big knight being followed up by a bunch of armatures. In this case, we have Canis Rex. We're then following that up with 1, 2, 3, 4 armature Helverins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 armature Warglaves, as well as 2 assassins. So the 2 assassins is the interesting part that gives the faction a little bit of backline objective control, just being able to put lone operatives on those objectives so they're not really threatened by that much. Calidus Assassin, obviously very important into a lot of matchups where you are worried about command point usage. And I think right now, I feel like I keep extolling the virtues of the Calidus Assassin, but right now we're in sort of a metagame where if you're playing against Space Marines, their entire, or for the most part, I don't want to say entirely because we are going to talk about some different Space Marine builds right now, but for the most part, their builds are focused around command point economy, thanks to Ultramarines and all their characters and all that stuff. If you are playing into a lot of Chaos factions, those tend to be extremely aggressive and extremely fast. So we're talking about armies like Emperor's Children, for example. Obvious Death Guard are a little bit more ranged focus, but there is kind of a push for these very aggressive builds. A lot of Shadow Legion lists right now are focusing extremely heavily on melee for Chaos Demons. And so we have a lot of these aggressive melee factions in the metagame, and we also have a lot of these factions who are trying to duplicate stratagems. Even both Death Guard and World Eaters just got CP cost reduction auras, so those are going to be seeing some play, I would imagine, as well. And the Calidus Assassin just gets so much extra value if your opponent's game plan is to rely on those free strat auras, because she's going to be able to tax them, which is enormous. So expect to see a few more Calidus Assassins. I actually was, when Ultramarines were a little bit more dominant, I was surprised we didn't see them quite as often, because being able to cut down on Ultramarine command point economy is actually enormous. That does sort of throw a huge wrench in their game plan, because they're usually so reliant on having enough command points to both fuel all their stratagems and also new orders to redraw secondary objectives. So I do think actually in the metagame standpoint, I do think that's pretty intelligent include. The Calaxis Assassin is there for some scenario objective play as well. Obviously, he can use his little shadow in the warp aura to disrupt enemy objective scoring while you are bearing down on the target with dozens, basically, of these OC8 armature Warglaves that can flip control of objectives incredibly quickly. This is a super powerful build. We've been seeing builds like this for a really long time, so no surprise that it has done this well. I'm surprised we haven't seen more play with Imperial Agents, things like Adept Roll with Immolators. That was a huge transformational change to Imperial Knights. It doesn't seem like in this particular case those did that well for this event, but otherwise obviously did incredibly well. Now, speaking of events that have also been won by Knights, let's move over to the San Diego Classic GT. This is a 61-player GT held in, obviously, San Diego, a very apt name over there. And it was won by Imperial Knights. Antonio Biello went first place with a 5-0 record with Imperial Knights. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're actually going to go ahead and talk about the number 2 placement here, Mark Farrick, who went undefeated with Aeldari. And the reason I want to talk about this Aeldari list is because it is not using Devoted of Uniad. It's not even using Aspect Host or any of these other detachments. We're in a Spirit Conclave this time, everybody, which is absolutely wild. So for those who don't know, this is the Wraith Construct focused detachment for the faction. It grants your Wraith Constructs +1 to hit and +1 to wound each time a Psyker model from your army is destroyed, targeting the unit that destroyed it. So your Wraith Constructs can freak out when your Psykers die. While your Psykers are nearby, those Wraith Constructs, they're also going to gain the effects of battle focus, so you can make them faster, you can make them immune to Overwatch, you can reactive move them. All that stuff is good to go. So what are we playing in this build? We are taking Behareth, the Phoenix Lord of the Swooping Hawks. We do even have some Swooping Hawks that are available for him to jump into. Big benefit there is that Behareth allows those Swooping Hawks to jump up in the air and come down and use their grenade packs immediately. So you're able to generate a couple of passive mortal wounds from these guys, not to mention the fact that they are an incredibly strong utility piece. Just being able to up down a 6-inch deep striker potentially repeatedly is kind of a big deal. We then have a Storm Guardian squad, 3 units of Wraith Blades in the battle line, 2 of those equipped with Ghost Swords, 1 with Ghost Axes. That gives the list a pretty solid selection of weapon profiles. The Ghost Swords are much better at high volume infantry. They're 5 attacks, strength 5, AP 2, 2 damage, versus the Axes, which are lower volume but higher strength, so they can punch through higher toughness enemies. And it's always nice when you see a sort of collection of war gear like this, because you know that the player has really thought about the role of each one of the models that they're including. But these guys make up a pretty nice battle line. They are relatively high toughness with a good save. You can reduce incoming damage characteristics when targeting them for just 1 CP, so they are even difficult to kill for heavy infantry sweepers. You're going to need to dedicate some serious power to actually get through these units and actually wrest control of objectives from them. We then have a Wave Serpent, potentially delivering 2 units of Fire Dragons in order to act as some anti-tank, which again, the Wraith Blades can struggle a little bit with. We do have a bunch of Psychers in order to trigger those Psyker abilities. That's in the form of 2 Warlock Conclaves as well as 3 Warlock Skyrunners. The Warlock Skyrunners are phenomenal independent units. They're fast, they're extremely cheap, and all of these are non-characters, so even if they play very aggressively, they're not going to be giving up secondaries like Assassination. You want to incentivize your opponent to kill them in order to spread out that +1 to hit and wound effect over the entire army. Now, importantly, that effect does affect all of your attacks, so it will also impact ranged attacks from units like your Wraith Lords. So even if they come in and kill your Warlock Skyrunners, the Wraith Lords there, rocking a pair of Bright Lances, are going to be hitting on 3s, wounding most targets on 2s or 3s as well with those things. In addition to their ability to buff themselves targeting a particular keyword, the Wraith Lords can go absolutely crazy once that buff is applied. But in fairness, the Warlocks also are just fairly good kind of infantry fighters as well. They are expensive as a utility unit, but they aren't particularly bad as a utility unit either. If the unit is fully powered up, each one of those Warlocks is going to be throwing out D6 plus 2 Strength 7 Torrent attacks at AP 1, which is pretty good at clearing light infantry. It's not going to punch through heavy armor. It doesn't ignore cover, so you are potentially protected by it with high strong armor saves, but they are good at clearing opposing utility units. So while they are expensive for utility units themselves, it's not like you're not getting any value from them besides the detachment ability. So we can get a lot of work out of these guys in the early game, clearing utility units and scoring points, and then as your opponent kills them, they're just going to buff your Wraith Lords and your Wraith Blades from when you get to the point where you start to hit into them. Given that those Wraith units can then benefit from battle focus abilities, you can extend their threat range potentially and sort of circumvent their relatively mediocre movement. Not to mention the fact that you have some classic Eldar inclusions like the Fire Dragons that can fight over the center of the table really easily, just absolutely eviscerating vehicles alongside Swooping Hawks that can score you secondaries pretty reliably as well. So overall, a pretty well-built list, and definitely cool to see a very non-standard composition that includes 15 Wraith Blades and 3 Wraith Lords. Not something that you would see in every Eldar list. So extremely cool to see this list see some success. Now, with that, we are going to move over to Space Marines, and for that, move over to Belarus, where the Minsk Eternal GT went down. This was a 30-player event and was won by Dima Sunchenko running Ultramarines. This was a 4-0-1 record, so 1 draw on the record, but they did use differential scoring, so those draws are relatively easy to secure. Now, this Ultramarine list is a little different than the Ultramarine list that we typically see, which is always cool to see. In the past, we've seen Ultramarine Vanguards do a ton of work, especially alongside things like combo-attached Apothecary Biologi plus Marnius Calgar on things like aggressor squads to allow you to get a blade-driven deep, really aggressively deployed unit. We've also seen combinations with Uriel Ventress to allow units to guerrilla tactics into reserve and then deep strike back onto the table. We're not seeing that as much here. Instead, the list is named MSU Power because we are really sort of leading into that MSU style of build. This includes 2 Vindicators, an Invader ATV, 2 Scout Squads, an Inceptor Squad, a unit of Company Heroes, which is likely to join in with Marnius Calgar. We do have that Centurion Devastator Squad, so they can up down into Strategic Reserve and then come come off the table edge in order to shoot at stuff at unseen angles. The big benefit here with Centurion Devastators as well is that we have Strike from the Shadows. So we can pay a CP, which we do get out of Marnia's Calgar, to give them +1 to hit when outside 12 inches of their target, and +1 AP. That could push the Twin Las Cannons up to AP 4, good enough to punch through most vehicle armor. Because Centurion Devastators reroll their 1s to hit, and their Twin Las Cannons always reroll their wound rolls, they're then firing 6 AP 4 Las Cannon shots with essentially full rerolls. Hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, winning on whatever, full rerolling the wound roll, which makes them extremely good at basically just pointing and clicking on whatever they need to kill, especially if you have Oath of Moment available. But because they have so many rerolls, this unit actually is kind of Oath of Moment proof, which is one of the reasons that we actually don't see Robute Gilliman in the list, because we don't necessarily need 2 Oath of Moment targets if we are choosing one thing for the Vindicators or the melee to kill, and then moving over and using the Centurion Devastators for 1 CP to basically just get the same effect and blow something else up. Now from there, we have a huge Assault Intercessor squad. Now I think there are a couple places that the characters in here could join into. The Company Heroes can join in with Marnia's Calgar to make him harder to kill. You can also use the Captain to join with the Company Heroes, and then you get a pretty neat forward operator, because that captain is running Blade Driven Deep, so he is going to give his unit Infiltrate when he attaches. So you can get a unit of Forge Company Heroes in an aggressive position, not necessarily to kill people, but to score points. They can fight other infiltrators just fine. A captain plus a Company Hero squad is good at killing basically any other infiltrating units in the game. The other option is, of course, that we can use the captain to just place 10 Assault Intercessors on our opponent's doorstep. It is a little expensive, 255 points for the captain plus the Intercessor squad. So if you are placing them in a position where they aren't necessarily going to be doing a bunch of damage once they go first, that can be a little scary. However, if you do go first, you could potentially just place them out in front of your opponent and then immediately charge them and box them in, really jail them. Or you could place them in a position where they have to come back and deal with that unit, which just moves them into danger of the Vindicators. So I don't 100% know where we assigned those characters. Marnia's Calgar is a fine attachment to the Assault Intercessors. He doesn't really get any benefit from their ability, but he gives that entire unit advance and charge, which is huge. Although obviously we do typically see him with Company Heroes. So I have a sneaking suspicion that's where he went in order to make him just the absolute powerhouse that he is. I have a whole video on exactly why that combination is so strong. But there are a couple of interesting options for either attachment. Now, in addition to that, we had 2 units of 5 Assault Intercessors with jump packs alongside a Reaver squad. Pretty cool to see them in there as well for potentially either a deep striking utility unit or just a scouting unit that can run up alongside those intercessors and do some stuff in the midboard early. So tons of scoring potential in this build. Tons of really sneaky plays we can do with potentially infiltrating those Assault Intercessors, and then also obviously the up-down of the Centurion Devastators. And then just some classic Ultramarine efficiency. Vindicators with Oath of Moment turns out real good, so they're good in just about any detachment, and getting the benefit of the cover and potential stealth that you're getting from the detachment ability makes those Vindicators very difficult to kill. Basically free smoke all the time on them, which is extremely strong. Very cool list, very cool to see. It's kind of off the beaten path of what normal Ultramarines play. No Gilliman this time around, no Gladius Task Force, and it's always cool to see builds like that do well. Now with that, we'll move over to the Winchester 40K GT, a 41-player event held in England. This event was won by Connor McNamara running Dark Angels. And no normal Dark Angels. Dark Angels, including their Primarch, Lionel Johnson. Unfortunately, Connor didn't include his detachment in his list, so not 100% sure what he's playing here. Now, normally what we would do is then look at the enhancements and see what the enhancements are for the list. No enhancements. In fact, a lot of our points went into Epic Heroes, so can't take enhancements either. So I suspect that we are playing Gladius Task Force. I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're playing Gladius Task Force, but I don't know that for sure. So who knows? It could be anything. It could be one of those cool Stormlance lists. Maybe it's that. I don't know. What is in the list, however, is also important, I guess. We are running Azrael for his 4+ invulnerable save and his CP generation. We are also running Lionel Johnson, the great man himself. Now, if you are playing some very resilient bricks of units, and we see 2 units of Death Ignites here, Lionel Johnson is a good inclusion there. He can go alongside them. They grant him Lone Operative with his bodyguard ability. And then if you move in to attack those, he is one of the scariest heroic intervention threats in the game. He will kill a lot of things on the charge, especially if he gets things like Honor the Chapter for a Lance buff, he is terrifying, and with fights first, he's just going to clip that out before it gets to attack those Deathwing Knights. So he is a great heart to that combo. We then have a Blade Guard Ancient, who is probably included just as an objective holder. It is, I believe, the cheapest data sheet in the entire faction. So despite the fact that he's a character, he's not the hardest thing in the world to kill. He does perform actions, and he does hold objectives just fine. You get an extra unit activation out of 45 points, which is just a nice thing to have. We then have a Judiciar, as well as a combi weapon lieutenant. Now, in terms of attachments, I don't exactly know where everything went here. We do have a big Sternguard veteran squad. They do have a little bit of synergy, both with Asriel and with the Judiciar. The Judiciar has a devastating wounds weapon. The Sternguard veterans gain wound rerolls when you're attacking their Oath of Moment target. Getting wound rerolls on a devastating weapon is good. However, they can also gain sustained hits from Asriel, and that will give them additional devastating wounds. We do have, however, Inner Circle Companions in the list as well. Asriel has perfect synergy with Inner Circle Companions. They have lethal hits on their attacks. Asriel could give them lethal and sustained, plus grants them their 4+ invulnerable save that they're missing. So that's usually the inclusion for where he's going. In addition, we also have a unit of 5 Assault Intercessors, which is another good inclusion for the Judiciar. So there are a lot of interesting attachment options for all these characters. I don't know exactly where they all would be going. There's also a small unit of Blade Guard veterans in the army as well, which could be an attachment, a little bit of a bunker for the Judiciar on top of that. So either place for those characters is a pretty good spot. It could be that the Assault Intercessors are just acting as a banner bearer, so they can drop down banners if you get that scenario modifier. They can also come in and just act as a utility unit, clip out other utility units. Obviously, they're very good at killing like toughness 3 enemies. They'll just kill 10 of those guys all day. So that might be what we're seeing. We also then see 2 units of Assault Intercessors, the 2 units of Deathwing Knights I mentioned before, classic inclusion, alongside an Infiltrator squad, a Scout squad for utility, and then those Sternguard veterans. Now, there's also the potential that this is in Stormlands. This is extremely aggressively oriented. It's all melee stuff. So Stormlands Task Force would be pretty good with this. They have access to a reactive move with that, which unfortunately, while Lionel Johnson can't use, you can do weird things like manipulate your placement of Deathwing Knights in order to then trigger his heroic intervention in the charge phase. It could be pretty interesting. You also potentially get access to Sustained 1 on the Sternguard veterans, which for a command point, which could also be a pretty good inclusion. So we're playing a little bit of guesswork here. This actually may be one of the Stormlands Task Force builds, but it very well also could just be Gladius Task Force build. We often see a little bit of shooting in the backline for the Gladius Task Force Dark Angels builds, so things like Ballistic Dreadnoughts or Vindicators. I'm not including any of those here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not playing Gladius. Gladius obviously has good synergy with all these units. That's the intended design. It's good with everything. So I don't know. It could be whatever. In total, I guess the entirety of the list, in addition to the characters, is those 5 Assault Intercessors, 2 units of 5 Jump Pack Assault Intercessors, 3 Blade Guard Veterans, 2 units of 5 Deathwing Knights, an Infiltrator Squad, 6 Inner Circle Companions, 5 Space Marine Scouts, and 10 Sternguard Veterans. I feel like I jumped back and forth between all the units enough talking about attachments that I didn't go through the entire thing. But pretty interesting Dark Angels build. Always cool to see the Lion on the table and doing well. So big congratulations for Connor McNama for taking down this event. Now, with that, we are going to move over to the 79-player Alamo GT and talk about some Chaos Demons. This event was won by David Hall, rocking Chaos Demons, and he was playing the classic detachment, a Demonic Incursion. It seems a little bit, I don't want to say this necessarily, because there is some innovation going on in Shadow Legion that's sort of taking it in more of a scoring heavy direction, more of a board control focused direction that I think is extremely powerful. However, it seems like we are seeing Demonic Incursion coming up to the fore as the strongest way to play Chaos Demons right now. It speaks to me that there is pretty solid internal balance, because it feels like both of those options could be true. You could basically be seeing people play either of those builds. Now, what was David playing with Demonic Incursion? This included Be'lakor, a Bloodthirster with Argath, the King of Blades, so that's +2 strength, +2 attacks for a Bloodthirster, which makes him the highest damage output version of a Bloodthirster in the faction. We have, speaking of highest damage output, let's talk about high survivability, a Grit and Clean One with the Endless Gift, alongside a Lord of Change with the Everstave and Scarbrand. So 5 greater demons, Be'lakor, Bloodthirster, Grit and Clean One, Lord of Change, and Scarbrand. These lists always give me the heebie-jeebies, because you could potentially hit somebody who is not good at performing actions innately, and they just lock in, assassinate, bring it down, score a bunch of points, and call it a day. Now, I know that you can play a game of keep away with lists like this, but it seems to me, especially with two Bloodthirsters, a Scarbrand and a Standard Bloodthirster on the battlefield, that might get a little bit tough as the game goes on, because you do actually have to get damage out of those guys if you're putting so many points into them. We then have a unit of Pink Horrors, so a very resilient battle line unit that can stand on an objective against shooting for a really long time, plus a Nurgling unit, plus a Plague Bear unit to obsec the home objective, and some additional utility from a Beast of Nurgle unit and a Flamer unit. This is kind of the classic Demon adventuring party, so it's actually cool to see this kind of build back on the 4. I feel like we've been seeing a move away from like kind of the well-balanced version that takes the tank, the DPS, the support, and the melee counterpunch, and we've been seeing more of a focus either on hard-hitting stuff or on resilient stuff like Rodigus, or utility from like Kairos Fateweaver, for example. The Lord of Change Inclusion is really powerful. This guy's able to hop up down with Be'lakor and shoot from behind Bellacor's lone operative aura, so he's actually very difficult to interact with. The downside I've seen with the Lord of Change is that his damage output is a little inconsistent, so sometimes you're not getting that much damage out of him. But if you are able to fight through that, and obviously we have damage elsewhere in the army, it has 2 Bloodthirsters in it, so it's not like you're not going to be killing people once you get stuck in, then the Lord of Change can be a really annoying nuisance to your opponent and force them to come in and fight this army, which is all it wants to do. It just wants to line up and have a big battle with you, and have you smash into the grid and clean one, not do much damage, counterpunch the Bloodthirsters, and absolutely kill you. So while Be'lakor teleports around and kind of laughs maniacally from the backline. Good stuff. Nice to see the classic Demonic Incursion back at the top. Hopefully it will continue, because this is one of my favorite lists in 40k. Now with that, let's move over to Idaho Falls in the US to talk about the Game Grid Open. This was a 35-player GT and was won by John Holbrook running Chaos Space Marines. Now, John was playing Fellhammer Siege Host, which I would say, given the fact that we've seen it sort of multiple times in the last couple of weeks, I think that Fellhammer Siege Host is maybe popping up as one of the stronger ways to play Chaos Space Marines, which is really interesting given, as the name of the list it describes, it was, I think a lot of people who kind of sort of poo-pooed it as it was coming out. It seemed very kind of bland and mediocre, but given the fact that it protects you so hard from shooting and makes you so inconsistent to interact with, it ends up being much stronger into metagames that are focused heavily on those ranged matchups. Now, this is a bit of an interesting build because it doesn't necessarily take all of the tools that we have seen in the past. We have seen things like a Bastion Plate, a Terminator Lord, alongside Fabius Bile to give you multiple instances of damage blanks over the course of the game. I don't know if we are playing Terminators this time around. It doesn't look like we are. Instead, our heavy infantry allotment is going to be taken up by Possessed. So we're focusing less on the... so we're going to be focusing quite a bit less on those like baseline tough defensive profiles, and instead taking Possessed profiles, which are very good jack of all trades, and then pushing them to be resilient in the extreme. Possessed also kind of make up for that by being relatively fast and above average speed, which shores up some of the weaknesses of the Fellhammer Siege Host. So that's a really interesting way to approach the detachment. So this includes Abaddon the Despoiler. I think he's going to be in there to provide a 4+ invulnerable save aura to these massive bricks of infantry. So you're talking about 30 wounds on a Possessed unit of 10 with a potential 5+ feel no pain, -1 to be wounded from ranged attacks that are higher than their toughness, and a 4+ invulnerable save. Punching through that in one turn is going to be extremely difficult. And then they hit you, Dark Pact, get devastating wounds, kick the crap out of you, and then move on and call it a day. We have a Sorcerer and Terminator armor with Warp Tracer. This is an interesting stratagem to grant. This is an interesting stratagem to strip cover from enemies. So this guy can kind of wombo combo that together with his Death Axe, so he can teleport into a position or just run in, walk up to a position, shoot a target with his Combi Bolter, hit it, strip cover, and Death Axe them for -1 AP. So you are essentially improving your AP characteristic essentially by 2 when this guy fully combos at you on you, and that's a lot of damage. We have 2 Cultist Mobs for utility, a Chaos Rhino for some additional utility in there, a Biker Squad alongside 3 Predator Destructors. Again, Predator Destructors, you can grant them lethal hits with Dark Pacts or sustain if they need to. They could go to AP2 against infantry targets, and then you can potentially give them them essentially +2 AP thanks to that sorcerer. This is real Renegade Raiders level of armor penetration at this point, so even shooting lethal hits into a heavy target where you're the equivalent of AP 3, suddenly each of those converted attacks starts to look very consistent, and the 3 of these with their powers combined can knock down very heavy targets, even with the benefit of cover. We do have a chosen squad. This could jump into the Rhino. We do then have a chosen unit as well. Now, I think this could be assigned to the Rhino to give them a little bit of a bump on threat range. You can also attach these guys in order to give him access to advance and charge, so you can get his super powerful melee profile into melee earlier. It also protects him a little bit from like incidental shooting, which would be nice, but obviously if you do that, they can't go into the transport. Not that you would want to, because you want to project his auras anyway. That's a potential inclusion there. The Rhino also could just be used to transport the cultists. They could just embark into it, and then in that capacity, you get a 75-point utility transport, which is always nice to have. So that might be what we're doing. We're just inserting cultists into it, because it can't embark the possessed, obviously. They are too big. From there, we then obviously have 30 possessed, 3 units of 10, for all the reasons that I talked about. Possessed are a pretty solid all-rounder profile. They're relatively fast, relatively tough to kill, and hit relatively hard. As soon as you start pushing any of those traits up, they go kind of crazy. So making them theoretically -1 to be wounded, as well as giving them a possible 5+ feel no pain, makes them extremely difficult to take down. If you don't end up taking them down, they start to unlock stratagems in the fight phase. You can use Persistent Assailants or Brutal Attrition to absorb attacks and then have the possessed hit back even harder, which makes these big, difficult to kill bricks incredibly powerful. So that's where a lot of the power of this army is coming from, is just this 90 wounds of 4+ invulnerable save, potentially -1 to be wounded, 5+ feel no pain, all that stuff stacked on top. That also hits fairly hard in melee. That's backing up a bunch of shooting as well. So very cool composition. A lot of times we see sort of the heavier focus on the elite infantry, like Chosen or Terminators. Not doing that this time around. Instead, we're going to focus on those possessed stuff. That's not a direction that I've seen Fellhammer Siege Host taken, but it does go to show that there is a little bit of build variety inside what seemed to be the most boring detachment in the faction. Whereas a lot of the other detachments have largely been figured out, Fellhammer Siege Host still got some innovation there, which is interesting. Would not be the one you would think to be one of the more flexible detachments in the Codex, but that's just how things have fallen, I guess. Now, with that, we're going to move over to Oklahoma for the aptly named Oklahoma Wargaming Network Breaking Point GT. This was a 44-player GT and was won by Cody Middleton running Chaos Knights. Now, it might shock you, but very little of what we talk about here is going to be super surprising. Cody was playing a Wardog Stalker with Aura of Terror, so he locks in objectives, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Brigands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Karnivores. Plus some utility, 3 units of Nurglings for forward operation, and a Beast of Nurgle for some scout. Do I even really need to say anything? This list basically hasn't changed since 10th edition came out, so I don't know. It's a Chaos Knights list. Look at that. It's doing great. Good job, Chaos Knights. Now, with that, we're moving back to Great Britain for the Brighton 40K GT11. This was a 30-player event that was held, obviously, in the United Kingdom. This one was won by Kian Tan running Emperor's Children. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it might be because Kian, aka Ash C, is a huge player on this channel. We stream her games over on Twitch quite a bit. If you play in the online 40K space, you have almost certainly seen her name around somewhere because she plays a lot and does extremely well. She's a previous T5S2 season champion and is on track to compete in T5S2 Invitational this year as well. So congratulations to her for not only seeing persistent success in online play, but also success in in-person play. Kian was running Emperor's Children, and kind of a little bit like Chaos Knights. This list might look familiar to you. In the last couple weeks, we've been seeing Emperor's Children get played. They mostly look kind of the same, so that's where we're going. This is a coterie of the Conceded Detachment, so you can pledge to destroy units for Slaanesh, and then you get extra rerolls and stuff when you do so. We have 3 Demon Princes, one with Pledge of Eternal Servitude. The interesting thing here is we have no Pledge of Unholy Fortune in the list, so we don't have any auto 6 guys, but instead we are saving those points to take more stuff. So 3 Demon Princes of Slaanesh in total, kind of like 4 if you count the second respawn if that Eternal Servitude guy does pass his leadership check to come back. 3 Lord Exultants and 3 Lord Cacophonists, and one of those is is the Warlord, so he's going to be absorbing damage as you fail pledges if you end up doing so. Importantly, that also means that it's tough to put him into transports because then you can't pledge on the subsequent turn if you put him in a transport. So keep that in mind. You are going to have to keep that guy on the table if you want to continue to pledge. Although thanks to the recent FAQ, you can put him into a transport, pledge 0, and then pay a CP to get 1 pledge token anyway if you kill his thing. So there's a little bit of play there, even if you hide that guy. We then have 4 units of Infractors, so 3 to attach in with the Lord Exultants, alongside 1 to act as a utility unit. These guys are especially good at just running up early game, clipping out a couple of small models that your opponent is performing actions with, stuff like that. You can use them to disrupt objectives without having to commit one of your bigger, more expensive character squads. We have 2 units of Tormentors for some objective secure and early game utility, 3 units of Noise Marines as well, 2 of them to attach in with the Lord Cacophonous to get sustained hits. We then also, and a 3rd one, we have a Chaos Rhino to springboard some of these guys into the fight, alongside a unit of Chaos Spawn for some early game utility on top of that. Overall, pretty standard stuff. It definitely feels like the more that we watch Emperor's Children develop, they have been moving farther and farther towards playing this kind of horde mode where they just play tons and tons and tons of little guys, and they start to take fewer and fewer of the upgraded characters who are more expensive. Lucius the Eternal, I think we've been seeing less and less. The enhanced Demon Princes and stuff like that, we've been seeing less and less, so that we can fit more of their very powerful battle line and Noise Marine units inside the army. Is that problematic for the army? Maybe, potentially. And we may see some changes to Emperor's Children in the near future. I don't know. It depends on what the future looks like. But obviously, the headliner right now is Death Guard. So they do have to fight Death Guard in order to get to that top spot, which is, I think, going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for our purple friends over here. But overall, relatively standard stuff for Emperor's Children, definitely showcasing their mettle as a faction. Now, moving on from that, let's talk about the 40-player Grampian Gaming Guild GT. This was held in Scotland and was taken down by Joe Robertson playing Necrons. And I don't want to talk about any Necrons here. This is Tesseract Vault Necrons. You know, Joe came to play because he's got that vault energy, that big vault energy. Joe is rocking a Technomancer. Joe is rocking, first of all, a Star Shatter Arsenal. Obviously, the name of the list is moving a Tesseract Vault outside Hypercrypt Legion is easy, and I will not regret this decision. Hypercrypt Legion, obviously allowing that Tesseract Vault to up, down, and then Cosmic Precision to place it anywhere on the battlefield, essentially. Makes it a lot easier to hop over walls and reposition that thing. If you're playing Star Shatter Arsenal, if the terrain is still tall enough, it's going to have to move over that and parkour terrain features or through the air movement terrain features in order to actually maneuver around the battlefield. But clearly, it ended up working out for Joe. In this case, we were playing a Hexmark Destroyer with Chrono Impedance Field, so he can give something -1 damage. A Technomancer alongside the Silent King. We had a Canoptic Reanimator to fix this stuff, Canoptic Spider, in order to give either the Silent King or I should say, the Tesseract Vault a 6+ Feel No Pain. We had 6 Canoptic Wraiths and 2 Crypto Thralls. Those could join together with their powers combined to create a single super tough to shift brick alongside that Technomancer. Hugely important piece in the Star Shatter Arsenal in order to give them some primary objective control, which sometimes the detachment sort of struggles with. You also have access to that end of turn reanimation, so they're able to keep themselves topped up even if they're receiving heavy damage. And the Canoptic Wraith unit is extremely difficult to kill with its Feel No Pains, with its Crypto Thralls, regenerating the Crypto Thralls, so they can sort of delay the fight in one area while the guns can pound other areas of the battlefield to dust. Speaking of guns, we do have 2 Doomsday Arcs alongside a little bit of utility, Flayed 1 unit and 2 Locust Destroyer units. Then last but certainly not least, the Tesseract Vault, the great man himself. Now, it's been a while since we've talked about Tesseract Vaults, so we should talk about exactly what these things do. First of all, they come equipped with 4 Tesla Spheres. So at a base level, it's firing 24 sustained hits, 2 strength 7 gunshots, which is fine. It's only AP 0, 1 damage. It's not going to end the world, but it is good at light infantry sweeping. But from there, we get to select 2 powers of the Catan. These are either an indirect fire, D6 + 3 blast with devastating wounds, strength 10, AP 3, 3 damage at a 24-inch range. You can kind of combo that a little bit with the Silent King's indirect fire weapon. So you can be firing 2 of these indirect fire weapons with reroll once to hit and wound from the Silent King's aura. Obviously, you can't ignore the auto hit, only hits on 4s thanks to firing indirectly, but that allows you a little bit of redundancy when you're blasting into light infantry. So even if your opponent's not engaging with your Doomsday Arcs, you can blow some stuff away as you're going. In addition, they can fire a Cosmic Fire, an Ignore Cover Torrent, 3d6 strength 6 AP2 attacks, or an anti-character 4 devastating times arrow that deals 6 damage with precision. So the 2 big scary attacks from this thing, not to mention the fact that the Tesseract Vault's also difficult to kill on a baseline. It's T12 with a 4+ invulnerable save, plus the Canoptech Spiders, and then potentially double reanimate that with the Canoptech Reanimator to keep it topped off if your opponent doesn't kill it. So I think the big thing here is that at the 24 inches, the Tesseract Vault can come in and be a huge powerhouse. Your opponent's forced to overextend to kill it, which brings them into the range of the Doomsday Arcs and into the Silent King. Most armies don't have what it takes to kill both a Tesseract Vault and also the Silent King through all of the Star Shatter Arsenal defensive mechanics. So it's likely that guy's able to then swing out in late game towards the end of the game to actually, punch through and win. Or vice versa. The Silent King could go down and the Tesseract Vault sort of just spins around for a while and hangs out. Either one of those is usually fine because you're then going to be able to win sort of towards at the end of the game as the game kind of closes out there. This is a really interesting build, especially because of the lack of interaction the Tesseract Vault has with Star Shatter Arsenal. I think it plays into the Star Shatter Arsenal game plan pretty well, where it wants you to kind of have to extend into this big central position, hopefully fail to kill whatever you're attacking, and that allows the Doomsday Arcs and the Silent King to counterattack you and then kind of like late game out with all of their buffs active. But unfortunately, while the Tesseract Vault does benefit from things like the Canoptech Spider's aura, it doesn't have any synergy with the detachment. So most of the detachment says it can't target Satanic units, so you're not really getting any benefit there. So I think it's good from a gameplay standpoint, but not necessarily good for like a raw synergistic standpoint. That's definitely an okay place to be for a big thing like this. Now with that, I want to move back to the Storm of Silence momentarily here for just a little bit and talk about Thousand Suns. We're still a little ways out for the full release of that codex. We just got it leaked early alongside points and everything. So the 10th edition codex is playable, but we are still an index version for this list. But I thought it was interesting because Thousand Suns have basically been a mono list in their faction for over a year at this point. It's basically been locked in that they've had one build that occasionally sees success. But Jaden Castelluccio here has built something entirely different. This includes Ahriman, an Exalted Disc Sorcerer with the Umbralific Crystal, so he's able to up-down. That's a big inclusion in the index build because you're able to potentially get him into range to then Binding Tendrils stuff that might not necessarily have expected it, which is a pretty important. You can also use him because he has a faster base movement to teleport into a particularly scary area and then reel him back with Temporal Surge so he can move up, like cast Doom Bolts or cast Twist of Fate or something, and then you can protect him with Temporal Surge. That's also super relevant. We have an Arcane Vortex Infernal Master, Magnus the Red, of course, because you got to have that guy in the index, alongside a Lord of Forbidden Lore, Demon Prince. Now, the Demon Prince doesn't get played that often, but he is a good little buddy for Magnus. He does grant stealth, so Magnus is going to be tougher to kill, and because he's in that like central position, he's also a good caddy for Lord of Forbidden Lore to allow him to duplicate a ritual once per round. We then have 2 units of Rubric Marines, probably to attach to Ahriman and the Infernal Master. We do have a 10-man with 8 Warflamers, which is usually the Ahriman units. They kind of like hang around in the middle of the table, generate Cabal points with Ahriman, and then rush forward into the center objective with that +1 to wound and absolutely burninate something super hard. Following that up, we have 2 Mutalith Vortex Beasts and, interestingly, 2 War Dog Karnivores. So the Karnivores are really fascinating here because they have very little synergy with the detachment or the army ability. They can't be targeted by or affected by things like rituals. But what they do is they give Thousand Suns something that they really don't have access to anywhere else, and that is a melee unit. Just a single melee unit. And this may be something that we see included in the new codex, because the new codex is, I think, a little bit less parasitic when it comes to including allies. It doesn't really buff them at all, but you aren't necessarily hamstringing yourself by not taking sorcerer units in the new codex. And so the inclusion of War Dog Carnivores here is interesting and could be something that we see replicated as we move on and start to talk about things like Grand Grand Coven lists, moving on into the 10th edition Codex variety. So what's cool here is that obviously we have the 2 Mutalist Vortex Beasts that can be relatively tanky. They're 5+ Feel No Pain. They also gain stealth from the Demon Prince, and then those are backing up 2 War Dog Karnivores that can kind of counterpunch for them. So we have 4 of these like big kind of aggressive monsters and beasts. The Vortex Beasts are more of the tanks, the sponges, while the Karnivores are counterpunches. And then you also have Ahriman's big unit as well for another big piece that can kind of control the middle of the table. So as we're jumping around with our sorcerer here and performing actions and doing utility stuff, we can do some funny hijinks with Magnus the Red, potentially giving him indirect fire and blowing people up with him. While you're doing that, you're sort of dominating the middle of the table with these sort of massive, big, scary pieces, which is not really something that you typically see coming from Thousand Suns. Usually, and this is probably going to move on into the future unless we start to see Warpforged Cabal do really well, which is, to be fair, a very good detachment. We'll probably see similarly that they're going to be focusing on these little like tactical marine kind of units, and they're going to be a little bit tougher to kill in the new Codex than they are now, but not by a huge margin. But instead of focusing on just the 5-man units and the characters, we're taking these like this vehicle bend here, which makes the armor a little bit tougher to kill than you would normally consider, and really overextends your anti-tank firepower when you're trying to deal with more Vortex Beasts and Carnivores attacking you, plus also killing Magnus the Red before he gets multiple activations into you, which is cool. It's interesting. It's different than any Thousand Suns list we've seen for basically like the last 12 months, which I'm always excited about, and that's why I want to talk about this. And also, it's interesting to talk about it in the context of having a new Codex, which we might be able to take a little bit of technology away from, which is cool. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks everyone for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to Adept Roll for sponsoring the video. If you want to support the channel, please do so at the YouTube channel membership. You can join in the link down below, or at Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. If you watch me over on Twitch, you can also subscribe to me over there as well. All the support is greatly appreciated. I have invested quite a bit into the channel in the last month in order to make the streaming better for DreamHack, while also having a couple other upcoming team events that I'm excited to cover. The ATC New York event is also upcoming on my calendar as well. It's a little stressful, but I appreciate everybody who has supported me through it, and I think the coverage is going to be great, so I'm super excited. And with that, I'll leave you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.